Howdy, I'm Mark. Today I'm going to be talking about the 5 reasons I left Washington State. Earlier this year, I moved from Washington State to Arkansas. I'll be doing a different video on why I moved specifically to Arkansas. This video is about why I moved out of Washington. I'll also be informing you of some of the cool things that have been happening at my grandfather's place, which I film most of my content, and I do a bunch of work over here. And we got this new lawnmower. The reason we got a new lawnmower is because this old one right here keeps chewing through belts, and they're like 80 bucks a piece, so we got a new lawnmower because this one keeps chewing through them. First reason I left Washington State was the cost of living. Housing prices, among other things, have skyrocketed in Washington State. My parents bought a house in the early 2000s for about $130,000, and that house is worth well over $400,000. And houses like that are exploding all over the state. Another thing is gas prices. Gas prices in Washington absolutely just went out of control. They introduced a new gas tax on the gas, so your gas really never goes below $4 a gallon and gets into $5 a gallon fairly often. Another thing is the price of land. The price of land across the entire state has gotten out of control. On the west side of the state, you can easily spend $500,000 for 5 acres. So being able to do that as a young person, get $500,000 for 5 acres is absolutely insane. The reason I want land is because I want to be able to farm, be able to grow a lot of my own food, raise cattle, and that sort of thing. And if you're spending $500,000 an acre, then it's a hard way to start. Price of hay in Washington is also crazy because you can easily spend about $30 for a 2-string bale of hay. Well, there used to be trees here, here, and here, but now all those trees are there. We were taking out about a bunch of trees over there so we can put a shop, but these trees were too close to the house and we didn't want them falling on the house. There's another tree over here there we'll take a look at in a second. The second reason I left Washington State is politics. The state is very divided in terms of politics and geographically. This is a map of Washington State's tree cover. You see that bald spot? Yeah, that's desert. That right there, a lot of places there get less rain than Phoenix, Arizona. They get 7 to 10 inches of rain a year. A very different world than living on the west side. The state is divided physically by the Cascade Mountains, but it's also divided politically too. The west side of the state is much more progressive, whereas the east side of the state is one of the more conservative places in the United States. Also, Washington State has kind of stopped listening to its voters. In the Washington State Constitution, you cannot have an income tax. And yet, an income tax has appeared on the Washington State ballot time and time again, even though the voters keep voting it down, and it is against the Washington State Constitution. And when you have no regard for the Washington State Constitution and you keep putting things on the ballot that are in direct violation, I see that as a problem. There has been several voter initiatives that have gotten things off ballots several times, and then a couple years later they just passed them without a vote. They just sneakily passed them. So when you're sneakily passing things that people on both sides of the state, the entire state voted it down, when you're passing things like that, I just think that's a bad way to be moving. Another thing is gun rights. The west side of the state is very anti-gun rights in a lot of places, and they want to have lots of restrictions and make it way harder to get guns. And I think that you should have less restrictions. Obviously, I think proper gun safety is a must, but having restrictions just for the sake of restrictions, I don't think is a good thing. Another huge problem that has absolutely exploded in Washington State is the homeless problem. They've changed a lot of policy to allow tent cities and things, and the homeless problem has just absolutely exploded. And it's not just in Seattle, it's across the entire state. In Seattle, you can hardly walk on the sidewalks though without stepping on some poop or something else, or stepping on somebody. So the homeless problem has absolutely exploded, and I mean, we've had a homeless problem explode across the whole nation. I know there's some people who say, oh, well, you can't just fix the homeless problem. Well, I would like to beg to differ. I mean, up until this point, you haven't had much homeless people. Even, you go back 20 years in Washington, didn't have that much homeless problem. And even now, most big cities now have a huge homeless problem, except Miami, because Miami is dealing with it. They have programs in place, and they're actually using their tax dollars to benefit the people in Miami and fixing up the homeless problem, whereas Washington is not doing that. I got another huge tree removed here. This is the tree right here. That is the stump. It's really big. My foot for scale. They got this one down. Again, this one was really close to the house, so they had a professional do it. They might be taking out this tree too. I'm really not sure. The third reason of why I left Washington State is how Washington State handled COVID. Washington State was one of the states that locked down very hard, and they were one of the last states to open back up. And they have said that if something like that were to happen again, they would lock down the same way. Whereas a lot of other states have said, no, we wouldn't lock down at all or as hard, like Arkansas, Iowa, and Florida. Because Washington locked down so hard and for so long, it took a giant toll on a lot of small businesses, and some of them ultimately just had to shut down, because if you're closed for basically 2 years, then it's really, really hard to stay afloat. A lot of people also lost their jobs when it came to COVID because of some of the things that Washington State was pushing. The fourth reason I left Washington State is the weather. Now, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, it just rains, and rains. That's great for, homesteading, having a farm. I lived on the desert side. There was no rain. But even if you live on the side with all the rain, like the Seattle winter depression is a total huge thing, because it is cloudy, it is rainy for like basically the entire winter. Not much variation, just cloudy and miserable. And a lot of people suffer from depression in the winter there because it is so miserable. Another huge thing, and one of the reasons I'm very glad not to be in Washington State anymore, is the smoke. I think it was last year, people freaked out about New York getting super smoky. In Washington State, we get that every single year. California, Oregon, Canada, and Washington have all changed their forest management regulations, so they no longer have to clear out any of the underbrush, which means that if you get a fire, it burns and burns and burns and burns. The fact that they want to leave the underbrush in because it is more natural, I think is absolutely ridiculous. Even the Indians cleared out the underbrush, because if you don't clear out the underbrush, then you can have devastating forest fires. And now every year in Washington, there is so much smoke. Pretty much the entire summer is completely smoky. Everybody is inside for months and months on ends. We were running tons of air purifiers in my house, but even then, I was still totally miserable. Tons of congestions, can hardly breathe. This is a relatively new thing. It's mainly in the past 10 years. I was talking with my grandparents, and they never saw smoke like this when they were kids, when they were teenagers, even when they were adults. They've only seen it in the last 10 years. I think that's mainly due to the forest management, or lack thereof. And the fifth reason I moved away from Washington is all the people moving in. Now, I don't have a problem people moving in, but when the people move in, they have a very different culture and they want to change the whole state. That is the quote-unquote problem, in my opinion. There is a ton of people moving in from California, and they want to do some pretty destructive things to the state, in my opinion. One of the things that they've been trying to get done, since a lot of these people have moved in, is take out the dams. Now, I know some people don't like dams because it hurts the fish. Washington actually replaced the turbines in their dams, and it got rid of almost all the fish deaths. They also made the fish ladders steeper, and it improved the fish's success rate. Dams are one of the cleanest and most efficient sources of energy in the world that we know of. And if you take out the dams, not only do you get rid of the really cheap power that you have in Washington State, all of that power is created on the east side, where you have the Columbia River, the Yakima, the Snake all coming into one. You have a lot of dams creating a lot of power, and we ship that power to the west side. The west side benefits a lot from the dams. And if you take out the dams, you also make millions and millions and millions of farm land just totally useless because it's a desert. All of those farms are reliant on irrigation. In the Columbia Valley, where all the farms are, they produce the most apples in the US, the most blueberries, the most hops, the most pears, the most peppermint oil, and the most sweet cherries in the entire US. If you get rid of all that water, you get rid of all of that food. Washington State also grows more potatoes per square foot than Idaho. Take that, Idaho. They also grow a ton of winter wheat. So if you get rid of all of the irrigation, all of those dams, all of that water, all of that farming goes away, and making millions and millions and millions of farmland totally useless. And also with all the people moving in from California, it just changes the dynamic of Washington. While Washington and California are both very West Coast in how they feel, they are not the same. Washington is very crunchy, very coffee obsessed, very chocolate obsessed. And we have all the people from California moving into Washington State. Not only do you get bad drivers, it also just changes the dynamic of the state. Now, none of this is to say that I hate Washington. I still absolutely love Washington State as a place, as a state. It's a beautiful state, both east and west sides, but because of the 5 reasons I've mentioned here, that's why I am no longer living in Washington. If you want to see the 5 reasons I moved to Arkansas, you can click here when that video comes out. But other than that, I'll see you guys all later.